Hi, and welcome back to Understanding. I'm Craig Biddle. Today, let's talk about understanding rights. I want to talk about the positive case for individual rights, the rights to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. And I want to talk about them in a few stages. We'll talk about the factual basis for them, the nature of force in relation to the factual requirements of human life, the reason that we need a principle based on those earlier facts, and then what a proper government does in relation to all of these facts. And then once we have the positive case for rights on the table, we can talk a little bit about the false theories of rights, and we'll have a better understanding at that point of why those theories are false. So let's look first at the right to life. So, what is the right to life? Now, presumably, if the thing exists, it's this idea that you should have a moral prerogative, or you do have a moral prerogative, to act as your life requires, to take the actions necessary to sustain and further your life. Okay, well, if this is true, where does this right come from? What facts of reality give rise to the need of this idea? What facts anchor it in reality? That's the whole business of understanding, is understanding what stands under a given idea. So we'll look first at this idea of a right to life. Well, what are the facts about human beings and human nature and how we have to act in order to live? Well, we are a being such that we have a certain kind of a mental faculty, this rational faculty, which enables us to understand the world and figure out what things are and what our needs are, and plan actions and take actions so that we can support our lives. And so, right at the most basic level, we can see a relationship between life and action. We have to act in certain ways in order to live as human beings, right? We have to figure out what is nutritionally good for us in terms of food. If we just eat random berries off of a bush, we might eat a berry that's poisonous and kill ourselves. So we have to think, we have to figure things out, and we've got to take certain actions. We need to produce values. We can't just rely on things growing on wild bushes. We have to actually produce values, and this is one of the things that as human beings we're capable of doing, and we do in order to live. So we've got to produce values, and we've got to be able to take these kinds of actions, thinking about things and figuring out what's true and producing values so that we can consume them in order to live. Basic facts of what it means to be a human being and what the requirements of our life include. So, this is a fact. Now, what does the use of physical force by other human beings, what does the use of coercion by other human beings, be it an individual or a group or a government, what does that do to someone's ability to act as his life requires? Well, if you take, say, Frederick Douglass and put him in a cage, or subject him to slavery, so you're going to make him act as you want him to act, to go out and work the fields and then go back to his shed and stay there until he goes out and works the fields again tomorrow, then Frederick Douglass cannot live as a human being, right? He cannot act as his life requires. He's living in this instance as something less than a human being, because your force is forcing him to not act in accordance with the requirements of his life. So we can see that physical force in any form, whether it's a threat of force, if you leave your shed, then I will do this to you, or the actual, nature of force, pushing him into, a cage or a shed and keeping him there, or any other form of force. This stops the person from acting as his life requires. So, force is antithetical to these fundamental requirements of human life, using your mind to figure out what things are and taking the actions you need to take in order to live. This gives rise to these facts we've just talked about, give rise to another fact, and that is the fact that in order to live together as human beings in harmony rather than in a state of war and masters and slaves with each other, we need a principle to help us remember what it is we may and may not do to each other if we're going to live together in harmony. And that principle is the right to life. The right to life is simply the recognition of the fact that in order for a human being to live as a human being, he must be free to act as his life requires. So the facts of reality, the factual requirements of human life, the facts about what physical force does to those factual requirements gives rise to the need of this principle that people may not use force against each other in such a way that stops the other person from acting as his life requires. And then a proper government, in light of all of these facts, says, in effect, yes, because this is true, that people must act in a certain way and that physical force does stop them from doing that. And if physical force is used, they can't live as a human being. We need a law to protect this right, right? The right is a recognition of a fact, and that in this case, it's a moral principle, a recognition of a moral requirement, the kinds of things, the kinds of actions that human beings must take. And a proper government looking at all of this says, yes, so we're going to outlaw physical force against human beings and use force only in retaliation and only against those who initiate its use. So you can see there are facts, there's the thing that physical force does in relation to those facts, there's the need of a principle, and then there's the need of a government to protect the moral prerogative, which is the principle. Now we're going to do this same analysis for all of the other rights. The right to liberty. What is the right to liberty? Well, you need to act in accordance with your rational judgment. That's what it means to be a human being. And the one thing that can stop you from acting in accordance with your rational judgment is physical force. To the extent someone uses force against you, whatever reasoning you're doing about how you should live your life is nullified. Whatever, if I lock you in a cage and you think, well, I should be out, creating my business today, or hunting for deer or picking berries or whatever the case may be, you can't act on that judgment because I have used force that stops you from acting on it. So the right to liberty is very similar to the right to life. The right to life is focusing on the requirements of your life. The right to liberty is focusing on the fact that acting on your rational judgment is the kind of action that you need to take. So what we need then, given what force does to your ability to act on your judgment, is we need a principle that says you have a right to liberty, a right to act in accordance with your rational judgment. And because you need that, that's the principle. It's the recognition of a fact, right? For each of these rights, there's a recognition, there's an in here part, and there's an out there part. The fact that given that human beings are certain kinds of beings with a certain kind of faculty that enables them to live, in this case, reason, we have to be able to act in accordance with that faculty. So proper government says yes to all of that and says, so therefore, we will outlaw the use of physical force against human beings and use force only in retaliation and only against those who initiate its use. So for the rights to life and liberty, we can see this trajectory. Likewise, for the right to property. One of the things that, given the kind of being we are, we must do in order to live is we've got to produce values. We have to be productive. We have to create things either for direct consumption or for trade with other people who have created values that we want or need and would like to exchange value for value. So we also, in addition to producing values, we have to trade. We have to be able to trade with each other. Physical force stops us from being able to do those things. If I want to go out and produce things today and you use force against me to stop me from going out and producing things today, or to not produce the things that I choose to produce, then I can't produce those things. If you stand between me and another person and stop us from trading values that we have produced, then we can't trade. We can't do the things in relation to property, the production of property and the use and trading of property that we need to do. Physical force stops us from being able to do that. So we have the need for a principle, a recognition of a fact of reality that we need to take into account. That's the principle of property rights, the idea that each individual has a right to keep, use, and dispose or trade the product of his effort. That's the right to property. It arises from these facts. And then a proper government says, again, yes to all of this. It's true that people must be free to produce and trade and keep and use and dispose of the product of their effort. Therefore, we will outlaw the one thing that people can do to stop each other from doing that, and that is the initiation of physical force. So the government says you can't do that. We will use force against anyone who tries that, but only against those who try to use force against people. So proper government is not initiating force, but only using retaliatory force as needed to enable people to live. So we've got rights to life, liberty, property, and then we'll go to pursuit of happiness. So in order to live a fully human life, it's not enough that we just keep our hearts beating and keep ourselves breathing. We need to live a fully human life, which means a life that consists of pursuing and achieving the kinds of values that not only keep you alive, but enable you to live a flourishing life, to achieve happiness. This is a requirement of human life. The living just by keeping your heart beating and not enjoying your life is not a human life. It's something less than a human life. So it's a fact that we need, in order to live fully human lives, we need to choose and pursue the goals that will fill our lives with meaning and joy. That's a fact. Another fact is that insofar as someone uses physical force to stop you from choosing and pursuing the values that will fill your life with meaning and joy, you cannot take the actions necessary to do that. Again, if someone sticks you in a cage or forces you into slavery or says, well, you may not have this lover, take a same-sex lover situation. So you have a government that says no homosexual sex, no homosexual relationships. Well, if somebody's gay and he wants to have a relationship with another person who is gay and it's mutually agreed upon adult relationship, that's a part of the pursuit of happiness. And if the government uses force and says you can't do that, they're stopping people from taking the actions that they need to take in order to live a fully human life. So we recognize this principle and codify it as the principle that you have a right, a moral prerogative, to choose and pursue the goals and values that will fill your life with joy. That's the right to the pursuit of happiness. And then we have a government who says yes to all of that. That's true that human beings must be able to act that way in order to live and achieve happiness. Therefore, we will outlaw any kind of any use of physical force that stops people from doing that. So that would be the initiation of physical force that would stop people from doing that. So we can see in each of the instances for all four of these major rights that you have facts of reality and the requirements of human life. You have facts about what physical force does to stop people from taking the actions necessary to live fully as human beings. You have the recognition of all of these facts codified into a principle, the principle of life being human beings must be fully free to act as their life requires in order to live fully as human beings. The right to liberty being human beings must be fully free to act on their own rational judgment in order to live fully as human beings. The right to property being human beings must be fully free to keep, use, and dispose of the product of their effort in order to live fully as human beings. And the right to the pursuit of happiness being the recognition of the fact that in order for human beings to live and pursue the goals and values that will fill their lives with meaning and joy, they must be fully free to act as they see fit in that area. And in each of these cases, the principle is based on recognition of facts. So this is the nature of rights. This is what rights are and where they come from. Now, if you think about the traditional approaches to what rights are, some people say, well, if rights exist, they must come from God. Where does this idea come from? It doesn't make any sense at all. Rights are not gifts from some supernatural dimension, and even if they were, they would just be supernatural permissions, which means they wouldn't actually be rights. They wouldn't be factual moral prerogatives to act on your judgment. If God can give you rights, he can take them away. But the fact is, there's no evidence for the existence of God to begin with. So the idea that rights emanate from his will and somehow manifest in us is just completely arbitrary and useless, which is why it's never served to demonstrate or prove to anyone that we have rights, which is why you get the utilitarian and some of the moderns who claim that rights are nonsense upon stilts, or that rights are won with witches and unicorns, because the idea is, well, there's no evidence for them. But that's because people are looking for the evidence in the wrong places. We've just seen here the evidence for rights. There are facts about the requirements of human life. There are facts about what force does in relation to those requirements. There's our ability to codify into a principle the recognition of these facts. And there's our ability to form governments that simply protect rights by banning the initiation of force, banning force from human relationships. So I think it's really important, particularly for anyone who wants to try to help defend liberty and defend rights, that we understand what these things are and where they come from, and that we're able to explain this to other people, so that we can hopefully start to get more and more people to see that it's not true that rights either come from God or we don't have them. Rights come from government, say the left, and so whatever the government says you can do, and whatever the government says you can't do, right? And that's the alternative is sort of either rights come from God or they come from government. Either way, they're subjective, and in terms of them coming from God, they can't be proven, and in terms of them coming from government, that completely eviscerates the very concept of rights, because that just equates them with laws. What the government says you may and may not do is not a right, it's a law. The purpose of rights is to inform governments and everyone of what proper laws consist of and what a government properly may and may not do. And so we've got to really understand this connection between the facts of reality and the nature of force and what rights are in relation to those facts. I hope you've found this helpful. I encourage you to look further into these ideas if you're interested. Ayn Rand's writings on this, both Man's Rights and The Nature of Government, both essays are in her book, The Virtue of Selfishness. So if you haven't read that, I encourage you to read that, in particular, those two essays. There's another essay in there called Collectivized Rights, which gets into these issues as well. I penned an article titled Ayn Rand's Theory of Rights, which you can find by just searching that on the internet. And that also, in a single essay, sort of encapsulates these issues. And I hope again that you've found this helpful. Join me again next week for another episode of Understanding. And until then, keep loving life.